Bukhari's book, maybe 2 or 3 volumes. 28 printed volumes. There was a scholar named Al-Masarjisi from Iran. He died in about 975 of the Common Era. His book doesn't exist anymore because no one had the courage to copy it. It would be 180 printed volumes. 180 printed volumes. Now, these hadiths, these books often just were full of absolutely unreliable hadiths. Hadiths that were, unreliable, no one was going to use them, they oftentimes had nothing to do with law. And you can ask yourself, and I want you to ask yourself because we'll answer it in the next slide, why would people do this? If they already had these very reliable books of hadith, Abu Dawood, for example, in his one of his letters, he says, about his sunnah, he says, if you have my sunnah and you have the Quran, you don't need to learn anything after this. You have the Quran, you have my sunnah, and that's it. You don't need to learn anything after this. But what you see after the era of the 6 books is that Muslims start using hadiths for a totally different reason. And I will talk about this now. The first function of hadith is the one that we've been dealing with so far. Hadith is a tool or a piece of information that tells us about how to act, what to believe, what's right and what's wrong. This is generally what people think about hadith, right? When they think about what the purpose of hadith is. The interesting thing about hadith is that after the time of the 6 books, they start taking on a very different role. They become a medium of connection to the Prophet and a means of excellence and precedence in the scholarly community. This is very complicated language. Let me explain what it means. Imagine you're a Muslim scholar, or you're a student, and you're trying to learn and become a great scholar. What are the ways that you can show that you're, let's say, have a lot of connections to teachers? What's the way you're going to build up your CV? People use hadiths to build up their CV. So, if you were able to, let's say, travel widely and hear hadiths from lots of different teachers in Egypt, in Iran, in what's now Afghanistan, in Yemen, then you can have a little hadith collection where you collect one hadith from every single one of your teachers. This is called Mu'jam al-Shuyukh, a collection of hadith where you have one hadith from every one of your teachers. Does it really matter if those hadiths are authentic or not? No, because the purpose of this hadith collection is not to be a legal collection. This is to show all the different places I've been and all the different people I've studied with. And it makes you look even better if you have hadiths nobody else has. Or if you have a shorter isnad than anybody else. Because you can imagine that the isnad is what connects you to the Prophet, right? The Prophet, what connects you to God ultimately. It connects you to the blessing of the Prophet, to his barakah. So, the less degrees of separation, the closer you are to the Prophet. And getting short isnads, or what's called ali isnads, elevated isnads, becomes something that Muslim scholars try to do so that they can feel close to the Prophet. And also, like with CVs, they also, it's kind of a way of showing that you're more accomplished, or have more teachers, or you're more pious than other people. As you can see, none of this really has anything to do with the actual function of hadith as something we use to know about our belief and our law as Muslims. It has to do with how Muslim scholars create their own scholarly culture. Remember, in Islam you don't have a priesthood, right? So how is it that people know when they are inducted into that group of people, the ulama, who have the right to interpret Islamic law and dogma? One of the ways is by having their own connection that goes back to the Prophet. So what we find in some of these later hadith collections, I talked about a Tabarani. Remember, he died in 971. He's the guy from Esfahan. His big mu'jam is 28 volumes. In one of his books, he has an isnad of 3 people between him and the Prophet. 2 people, sorry. Wait, 3. He heard from a guy named Ja'far bin Humayd, who heard from his grandfather, who saw Anas ibn Malik, the companion of the Prophet, teach him how to do wudu. So that's Ja'far bin Humayd, his grandfather, to Anas bin Malik. So, yes, I see. So he's a Tabarani. He's living in Esfahan in the middle of the 900s. He lived to be around 100 years old. He started learning Hadith when he was 13 years old. So he has this isnad of only 3 people back to the Prophet. Now, that Hadith is totally unreliable. Okay? Nobody ever heard of this guy Ja'far ibn Humayd. No one ever heard of his grandfather. Right? How can you be living in the 900s and you're basically 3 people away from the Prophet? Bukhari's book has 28 isnads in it that are 3 people long. And Bukhari was living 100 years before that. You know, if you look at the Sunan of the Tirmidhi or the Sahih of Muslim, you'll never find hadiths that are with 3 people in the isnad. Maybe 4 people. This guy's living 100 years later, he has a 3-person isnad? Okay. Now, if his last student died around 1038 of the Common Era, he had a student who was a woman who died at around 520 of the Common Era. About 1120 of the Common Era, right? So if you were living in about the middle of the 1100s, you heard this woman give her isnad to her teacher, to a Tabarani, through this 3-person isnad, you would be living with 6 degrees of separation from the Prophet in the 1100s, right? So you're basically 500 years later with 6 degrees of separation from the Prophet. You can just imagine the sense of closeness that this gives people and sort of pride in their scholarly accomplishments. And of course, this hadith is not reliable. The isnad is not reliable. It becomes like a collector's item. When someone collects coins, does it really matter what the original worth of the coin is? If I have a penny that's really rare, I don't really care that a penny is worth nothing. The point is that it's really rare. And the point is that that's what makes me proud of it. Another very interesting thing is when you have hadiths narrated by jinn, right? Because again, you have people. For example, the famous author of the dictionary, Taj al-Arus, Murtada Zabidi, he died 1791. He's originally from India. He moved to Cairo. He heard from a jinn, who heard from another jinn, who heard from the Prophet. So he had only 2 people in the isnad. They're just jinn. That's fine. Now, no one is ever going to act on that because Muslim scholars don't accept jinn transmission when it comes to law. So if you meet a jinn and he tells you, by the way, you don't have to pray 5 times a day. That's just I don't know how this happened. It was a big misunderstanding. I heard the Prophet say you don't have to pray 5 times a day. You can't listen to the jinn because jinn transmissions are not admissible in law. It's something that Muslim scholars sort of kept around as this tradition of connection to the Prophet. Okay.